Welcome to the show, Usman. For our audience, could you please tell us more about yourself and what you actually do at Omniscient Digital?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, Anand. So, I'm an organic growth strategist. I work with B2B SaaS companies mostly, but mainly B2B is my playground for organic search growth. Omniscient Digital is where my full time role is. I'm currently working on a bunch of accounts with my editorial lead, and we drive organic growth. That's mainly what we do. We help companies make more revenue through organic search as a channel. Apart from that, I also work as a consultant on the side with, again, B2B SaaS companies to help build their organic growth programs and play fractional role working with their teams in an integrated manner. So, yeah, so B2B search strategies is where my zone of genius is.
Nice, interesting. I know you have also worked with Triple Dot before. Do you still have that collaboration, or are you completely focused on Omniscient Digital?
Yeah, no, so at this point, I'm just focused on Omniscient. My previous role was at Triple Dart. It started as a consulting gig. So
Oh,
they needed help with some processes and some of their projects, onboarding stuff, documentation in general. So we started with that sort of a model, but then it transitioned into a full-time role when they had a vacancy open and they, offered a role to me. I was there for a couple of months and then I took this opportunity on as the strategist for Omniscient. So currently this is my full-time thing.
oh, nice, nice. Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people who work at Triple Dot because they were my ex-colleagues at Freshworks. So, yeah, I know them really well there.
Yeah, for sure. The Freshers network is pretty big. I remember even at Triple Dot, they had clients who were formerly colleagues of them. So it was very interesting to see that entire network and like a web of people interconnected.
Correct, correct. Yes, yes. Yeah. So, Usman, you would have obviously worked with a lot of SaaS and B2B, companies, and I'm sure you would have come across maybe relatively bad SEO strategies. But according to you, what is a good SEO strategy, and what are the key elements and steps involved in creating a sustainable SEO growth strategy?
Brilliant question. So the way I think about building an SEO strategy is based on these 4 to 5 different components that come to my mind. And I've just tried to model this, which I can then replicate on any project and build their strategy. So I start with a growth objective, right? So what exactly is the company trying to achieve? That's number one for me. And that can be on a spectrum. For some early stage startup companies, they don't have a lot of clarity around a specific number they're trying to achieve, specific pipeline they want around a dollar value, but they still have a goal, right? They want to grow traffic, they want to achieve something. So building the foundation at the growth objective stage is important. That would be number one. The second thing would be looking at all of the growth opportunities available to you, which again are different for different companies. A good example of this would be a company that has some sort of user generated content opportunity. Maybe they have some user reviews, maybe they have a community subdomain that can be turned into UGC content that can be indexed and can drive search traffic. And then there are also other companies that have a model to drive backlinks on steroids somehow, right? Maybe they host um, their customers own product on their own subdomains, which then can be turned into redirecting link value back to their foundational domain, something like that, right? So they have engines going on which you can identify, and then you can stick with that and say, hey, this is where we can grow the fast. So just
Mhm.
looking at what sort of opportunities you have available to you, that would be the second step. The third thing would be, in my opinion, looking at your competitive advantages. So, according to me, almost every SaaS company, almost every B2B company has some sort of a competitive advantage. It can be as simple as, hey, we have a lot of resources. Can we publish faster than our competitors, right? Maybe we have a lot of funding. It can be a competitive advantage. And even if it's not about the money, it can still be about, hey, we have if we play in a small niche, we can dominate this territory before we move up market. And for us to dominate within this particular category, within this small territory, is relatively easier, etc. Right? So just identifying what exactly are your competitive advantages would be the third component. And then lastly, I would think about what kind of resources you have, right? It all just comes down to um, what you can achieve, not necessarily what you should do, right? It's just, again, on a spectrum. You have hundreds of possibilities that you can go after, a lot of opportunities on the table, but you have to prioritize based on what you can realistically capture, based on, again, your resources, your expertise, where exactly is your zone of genius as a company. So those are some of the components that I think about usually, and this applies well to, again, large scale enterprises as well as small scale startups. And if you just think about it in this sort of a manner, it helps clarify how exactly you should build the entire strategy, the content direction, which pages need the most link equity, what are some of the strategies around link building that would work, which sort of technical SEO prioritization models you can use, which tasks to work on, which tasks to just leave out in the dust. So it just helps guide everything if you have clarity on these components.
I think that was a very interesting points that you've highlighted, of which when you mentioned the communities and converting that more into UGC content, which can basically be available for the users or prospects to actually see. I think, I mean, I don't know how many companies out there actually make use of that. But I think, yeah, that's an interesting, yeah, I mean, if you already have a community, then why not make more use of it? Yeah.
For
Um,
sure.
and I mean, there is a lot of discussions now. I mean, this question also aligns with the first one. There is a lot of discussions around the old way of SEO versus new way of SEO, and with a lot of changes happening in the SEO world with AI coming in. How do you think AI is actually changing the traditional SEO practices?
Yeah, so it's changing it in a lot of ways for sure, right? Like we can see it happening in the industry, in the community. Most of those are ways that I wouldn't agree with, and are also not long-term strategies in my point of view. Which, of course, one is just content creation using AI. As of now, there are, like, I believe, hundreds of tools that you can use for one-click content creation. You just press a button and it churns out a whole blog post. I'm not a fan of that sort of a model, simply because I personally don't have anything against AI. I'm all up for automation and just like incorporating unique ways of creating content. The problem is that sort of content, as of now, and it may change in 6 to 12 months. Who knows, right? What happens? But as of now, in 2024, that sort of content is terrible. Like, quality-wise, it's really, really low quality.
No,
So
we have seen this because we tested with few kind of pure AI created content with tools out there. They all ended up being like zero viewers. It's just yeah. It's I don't think it's actually gives any value to the prospect or to anyone who actually wants to read it as well.
Yeah, exactly. I've had similar experiences. Perhaps anyone who has this view has at least one time tried these AI tools on their own,
Yeah,
right? Just to have first-hand experience.
yeah,
So I would say the content quality in general for these kind of tools is pretty bad, and that's like the one core reason why this content creation model using automation is something that I'm not a big fan of. Now, but that's like maybe perhaps 10% of the possibility that we have with AI using in SEO for organic search growth. The problem is the other 90% is something that people either don't think about, or, for example, it's not as sexy as people would call it. So,
yeah.
for example, if you read Google's own guidelines on AI, their view on creating content with automation, they're pretty clear about it. They've said it within their documentation that they reward high quality content regardless of how it's created. So, and they have exact passages saying, hey, we're not against automation. In fact, we've supported content created with automation for decades. And if you think about this, Anand, there are so many different formats of content that can be created. The problem is it's our limitation as marketers to only think about blog content. For example, some of the examples that, again, come from Google's on documentation are related to um, weather forecast, right? That has been in use for decades, and they're using automation to figure out what the forecast would be. And again, you can create a lot of content, programmatic sort of content, using that sort of automation if you have some first party sort of data, proprietary data that you can use to churn out some good quality pages. That would be one example. Stock prices forecast, right? All of that stuff again is based on automation. in its core. So there are so many different applications. And then even if you think about textual content, again, it's on a spectrum on how you incorporate AI and automation. So the way I think about this is I have a very recent example where, for example, I was thinking of doing some research around Reddit. So I made this post about how Reddit grew in its traffic and all of that stuff, right? So I was trying to figure out why is it that, Reddit grew a lot in search traffic in the past year, but their stock price has not gone that up, right? Overall.
Yeah.
And that correlation was interesting to me. So I wanted to dig deep and figure out what's happening. And I thought maybe I'll figure out something within their earnings report. But now
Mhm.
that's like, a 50 pages PDF that I don't want to go through on my own. So that's exactly where AI should come into the picture, in my opinion, right? So you can download that report, put it into ChatGPT, and then try to figure out some patterns that you can see, which correlates with traffic growth not resulting in the company's overall valuation increase. So, and again, if someone was to write a thought leadership blog post or maybe content for SEO around a similar sort of a subject, they can use all of those insights that ChatGPT collected in minutes, which would have taken you hours to do on your own. So that
True.
sort of integration, in my view, is where automation can be helpful, while the strategy part, the thinking part, is in your own hands, in your own control. So broadly speaking, I think again, even in textual content, you can use automation, and it's changing things definitely for the companies that are using it very smartly, which are
Yeah.
not outsourcing their strategic thinking to AI, but rather using it as a facilitator. So perhaps if we just talk about the crux of this, it would be that most of the companies that are thinking of incorporating AI in their SEO strategies are using it as a strategist rather than an intern, which should be the way to go.
True. Yes, I think if you are basically trying to use AI just as a content creator, where you want to have more content at a higher velocity, yes, you may succeed there, but then those content is definitely not going to bring any value. And yeah, I think we are very much aligned on this as well. And a lot of people who initially implemented AI, I think now they've started to realize, yeah, this is not how we should make use of AI. But obviously AI has a lot of the positive side of things as well, especially like you said, when it comes to summarizing things, identifying trends and patterns, which indirectly we could include in our SEO strategy as well. Yes, another question around the SEO and the new way of SEO is, do you think the SEO marketers are still very obsessed with search, where 99% of their effort still goes only on ranking in search, whereas what we normally have seen is that it's much more than just search?
Yeah, for sure. So I see this obsession with search a lot. And of course, this makes sense because we are SEOs, right? We have to be focused on one channel, and that's where our specialty lives. That's where we've built our expertise for years. So that affinity makes sense to me. But the problem is, for many companies, when they're getting started, there are two scenarios. One, either search is never their market, right? Their searchers, their buyers are not actually searching on Google for something. So even if they think about their go to market strategy, search wouldn't have a large role to play in that. So one example that comes to my mind would be SparkToro, right? So Rand Fishkin, being the SEO guru, right, that we all learned from, has never done any SEO for SparkToro till this point. His reason mainly was that when he built that tool, there wasn't really a deeper understanding of what an audience intelligence tool is supposed to do, right? So that term in itself, even if Rand Fishkin was able to rank on it, right, and they can churn out some articles, drive search traffic for that keyword, it still wouldn't drive the right kind of searchers, simply because the market does not know what an audience intelligence tool exactly is and what it does. So there's no maturity in the searchers and in their buyers around that term specifically as a non-branded keyword. So building an SEO strategy and trying to drive traffic in that sort of a scenario doesn't make sense. What should make sense is to be in spots, as Rand Fishkin says it, right, where their audience is paying attention. So
Correct.
if you are a B2B SaaS company or any company, and you think your audience is on search, they're searching, when they're looking for a solution, when they're in the market to buy, then of course SEO should be your main primary focus, and you will drive a lot of revenue, a lot of value out of that channel. However, in other cases where you can really easily spot that, hey, I'm building a unique product, there's not a lot of search demand simply because it has not existed before. Like, this is a new category that I'm jumping into. Then search is not an amazing channel to start with. You can still, generate some sort of demand with, how-to pieces and more middle of the funnel sort of articles, but it's not going to contribute to revenue as much as it would for a more mature category product like email marketing software or maybe a project management software. So that's one scenario. The other thing that I also see is some companies, when they have a huge search TAM, right, where they think, hey, we can definitely drive value from SEO as a channel, and we can generate pipeline, but we're very early in this journey, right? So we don't currently stand at a point where SEO will become a profitable channel for months and perhaps years to come. So think of maybe a category like project management, right? So you're competing with ClickUp, Asana, Monday, right? All of those huge, gigantic players.
Yeah.
If you're a new age project management tool, then if you're just starting with SEO very plain, like, hey, this is my first marketing attempt and I'm picking SEO to grow with, that might not be the best idea, simply because you need to have the funds in order to, go over that initial hump, right? The usual thing which SEOs say, hey, it takes 6 to 12 months to generate results. If we're defining results by conversions, by customers, by profitability of the entire SEO program, then of course it takes time. It definitely will take 6 to 12 months to generate ROI. It doesn't mean you cannot generate clicks in the third month. In the second week, perhaps you can generate some impressions, but if you're
Yes.
talking about ROI and profitability, you have to wait. And if you wait, which means you should be doing something on other channels to drive some initial demand, which then can facilitate your investment in SEO as a program. So that is something that I see a lot. Whenever I get on, for example, let's say consulting calls, discovery calls of any sort, my initial question is how big of a market they have in terms of search as a channel. And then if there is a market, are they at a point where they can afford to invest in this channel and not expect a return for the next 6 to 12 months? And when I say a return, I mean a return on investment, right? Where they're
Correct.
making more money out of SEO compared to
Yeah.
what they're spending. So very recently, in fact, there was this B2B sales tech company that I got in
Mhm.
touch with, and they were in fact figuring out whether they should be working with an SEO service provider. So they were not interested, at that point, they were not looking to hire me. They were just getting some free consulting around whether they should work with an SEO provider or not. So we
Mhm.
created a spreadsheet and we thought about, hey, this is how much your top competitors are generating in terms of search traffic. And even if you are to get to this level, it will take you roughly this many months. And based on your ACV, based on your conversion rate throughout the funnel, you can generate, ROI in, let's say, 8 months or 10 months,
Yeah.
assuming that you get to, let's say, 10 to 15,000 visitors a month in the next 6 to 12 months, roughly speaking. But that just adds clarity for them that, hey, if I want to generate value out of this channel, I need to get over this initial hump of investment and I should not have high expectations. So those would be the main two scenarios. One, either the search demand is never there, and the company still just obsessed with search, and SEOs, have this obsession with search. And then in other cases, even if that demand is there, perhaps at this point it's not a big priority channel wise. Maybe that money is better spent on building a founder brand on LinkedIn, right? Doing all of the stuff, for example,
Right.
that hockey stack folks have done with
Yeah.
their content.
True. Yes. I mean, I think, yeah, you've basically highlighted three important points here. So, one, a lot of companies or SEO marketers still feel maybe SEO is only till driving traffic, just ranking and driving traffic, and that definitely is not, because it's about ROI, it's about the returns. I think second, that a lot of people think is exactly like you said. So the SEO strategy, the expectations has to be different from, based on what space they are, what category they are, what stage of growth they are. And I don't think that happens. Everyone has a blanket, like 3 to 6 months. Okay, you start SEO, in 6 months you need to see the impact of it. And I think, yeah, I'm sure a lot of companies and a lot of people who evaluate SEO still do it that way, unfortunately. And the third and the most important point is, yes, it's not just search. it is much more than that, because then it's about communities. How are you getting included in places where your prospect actually look for or search for your category or your tool? Yes, Google search or Bing search is one part of that, but then that's not the only part. And I think that's something that people need to shift their mindset to, than investing everything only on, either Google or Bing search.
Yeah,
So yeah.
exactly. Totally, totally. And perhaps another point that people often miss is that, especially in B2B, there are so many different touch points before someone will, eventually pick you
Correct.
as a
Yes.
solution. So
Yeah.
just think, perhaps most of the SEOs just think as in they're in the e-commerce business, we're like, hey, I'm gonna create this listicle and someone is gonna read it and then convert to my, $6,000 product. Like, it doesn't work like that, right? So you still have to have some presence on LinkedIn, maybe
Yeah.
have some email sequence, and all of those different kind of channels should still be in place. And of course, still SEO can drive a lot of value, but if that is all that you're relying on, perhaps you're not gonna go very far.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, it's true. It has to be an omni-channel approach where both, yeah, I mean, even if it's a paid side of things, or even it's like community building, listicles, gathering reviews. I think everything has an impact on the non-paid side, and the other way around as well. Which I don't think, yeah, people have that bigger picture. They are still very focused on the rankings and the traffic that it brings directly from search. Interesting. And something's that can go along with the same question is keyword research best practices. Because if it's not just about Google search or Bing search, how else should an SEO marketer look at keyword or topic research?
So in my opinion, the biggest problem and gap that I see in keyword research today is less about the tactical methodologies of keyword research and more about the strategic approach that SEOs and content marketers usually have. So, what I mean by that is they start with keyword research, and that is a big problem according to me. So, especially in B2B, when you need to have clarity on who exactly are you targeting and what exactly are the pain points, the kind of terminologies they're using, what are the triggers that make them initiate their search for a solution. All of these different aspects are something that you need to have clarity on before you get into keyword research. So, for example, if you think of two different, let's say, email marketing solution companies, and they have, let's say, totally different personas that they target, right? Perhaps in their ICP documentation, they've mentioned like, hey, we're selling to junior very junior email marketers, and then the other company is like a high ACV product and they're like, we sell to director of marketings, we sell to VP of marketing, right? Now in those two scenarios, imagine you've given an SEO, an average SEO today, the
Hmm.
URLs of those two companies, and you say, hey, can you do the keyword research for these two companies? I'm 90% sure that the keyword research will overlap so much, simply
Yeah.
because they don't understand how I'm targeting two different personas, and in their motivations, their pain points, everything they care about in their day to day will be so much different. So, and that comes from a lack of customer understanding, right? Just not knowing how exactly my customer differs than another persona. So yeah, so like my process usually is, when we start working with a client, is to have built an initial foundational knowledge around the customer, which involves mainly figuring out who we're targeting, so the persona, right? Like, is it a director of marketing, maybe another persona, another role, and what are their responsibilities, what they care about. Second would be, what are the pain points that they are trying to solve actively, what are the main the things that keep them up at night. The third thing would be, from a customer journey standpoint, what are some of the triggers, right? What exactly needs to happen for them to start looking for a solution like ours? So maybe again, if it's like a, maybe imagine if we're thinking of hockey stack or maybe some other sort of an attribution software, I would think of, hey, what are the metrics that they pay attention to, where they go like, hey, we need an attribution software to optimize this metric. And those kind of metrics uh, would then inform the kind of content that we should create. Another example could be something like, if you're thinking of maybe a customer service software or something, then maybe an NPS score is something that they pay attention to, and that triggers the search for a solution, right? Ultimately. So just
Yes. Yeah.
knowing what happens exactly, what are those events that triggers the search for a solution that we're offering. And then lastly would be the terminology, right? So exactly as um, how the patients and the doctors usually have a very different terminology to describe the same sort of a problem or disease. I think about this in the same way, where um, you, based on your sophistication in a field, will use specific terminology, while your customers might have a different way of describing the same thing. So a good example of this would be, imagine if we're talking about Google Drive as a product and we don't know it is called Google Drive, right? And we have to describe what the product does. And imagine two different personas. One is a very junior person and they're using Google Drive for their very day-to-day personal use case of just uploading files and this and that. The other person is maybe an engineer and they use Google Drive to share, maybe they have a very sophisticated use case, and they share very complex sort of files, where they care about security and all of that stuff with their colleagues. If you ask those two people and they don't know it is called Google Drive, right? They don't have that part of their brain that recalls the brand name. In a world like that, one person, the one using Google Drive as a product for their personal use, will call it something like a file sharing software, while the
Oh, yeah.
other one, engineer, more technical, will call it something like maybe a cloud management software, right? Like more sophistication in their language will show up. So all of these things are pretty interesting to me. I try to figure out how our persona would describe the problem, the product, and everything within their industry, and what are those terms that I need to be paying attention to. The best way to gather that information is in a multiple different formats that you can use. Customer interviews is a really good one. You can do some
Yeah.
surveys. You can gather feedback from and information from different sources on the web. So G2, Capterra, all of these user review sites are amazing. You can scrape LinkedIn content. You can check out how people are interacting and talking about things on Reddit. And once you have all of that information mapped out, once you have clarity on all of those fronts, then you do the keyword research, right? Then you get into Ahrefs and SEMrush, and you go into the phrase matching report, etc. Because what happens afterwards is, if I'm doing all of that research and now I'm getting into Ahrefs and I'm not now seeing keywords like what is email marketing, and I know that my target persona really does not care about this kind of definition focused, high level basic content, I'd be like, no, this does not make sense. Let's exclude this as an opportunity. So like just with a quick scan, I can have this mental proclivity to define what exactly my buyers would be looking for and what keywords would not be resonant with them. So yeah, so I guess in terms of keyword research, the best practice for me is to just make sure that you have all that you need on the customer research front, and then use those insights to then do your tactical keyword research. You can still do the volume and keyword difficulty prioritization if you want, but you just need your basics in place before you get to that level.
Oh, I love this point. I love this point. So, yeah, I mean, the only thing I just have to say is that SEO marketers need to get a life outside such keyword research tools, because all that they currently do is identify keywords that has sort them by volume, identify keywords from Ahrefs or SEMrush or whatever it is. But yeah, this is exactly the shift that SEO people need to start doing. They're already late, but then they should at least start doing it by now. Yeah, I mean, at OneFlow, we do exactly the same, because I think for us, it starts with our the recordings, the conversations that our salespeople has with their prospects, both the cold calling one as well as the advanced conversations that they have with their prospects. It's totally different and based on what their role is. Exactly like you said, junior or they're senior or they're decision makers, then it's a totally different use case itself. What are their pain points? What are the challenges? What are the things that they want to solve? And what are the use cases? Yeah, I think based on that itself, there is a lot of content which we should basically focus on creating first. And then, yeah, and you could always use these keyword research tools as a backup or to kind of confirm or verify your the content. And some of those long tail topics would obviously won't have any volume in these tools, but people do search for that. So Yeah, I think it's a very very important, and it's high time people start shifting towards this than just looking at keywords and creating content around it.
I totally love the fact that you folks are using the sales calls and all of that,
Yeah,
approach. A big fan of all of that. I think that's like one of the best ways to gather direct customer insights. Um, yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
so amazing. Kudos to you folks. And maybe a small caveat here is, even for folks who are listening, we're not saying that there are not some obvious opportunities that you can just, try to cash in as quickly as you want. Maybe there would be some very obvious kind of bottom of the funnel keywords. Maybe you have a user onboarding software and there's a keyword like user onboarding platform, right? Sure, go ahead and target those. But then in the bigger picture, when you're thinking of your content strategy, you simply cannot move further and drive a lot of value if you don't have insights driven directly from customers and you don't have clarity on those fronts.
Correct. Got it. Yes. Yes. And just to add a point here, so I mean these research, these yeah, the conversations that you need to listen to, it's not just specific for just SEO people, but I would say everyone in marketing should do this, because you need to understand your customer, what their challenges are, and you could basically gather those inputs and utilize it in, even if it's your paid campaigns or organic social or anything. It's a very important step for all marketers. It's great that you brought this point in this conversation. Yeah. And for me, yeah, one last question before we end this conversation, and I think this is kind of another important point, because I feel a lot of SEO marketers spend time in technical SEO audits, especially completely depending on tools like Screaming Frog and some similar to those. But what is your take on this? Do you think what people are currently doing is right, or is there another way of doing it?
Yeah, so in my opinion, again, it could be different compared to how other people think about this. But what I've seen in the B2B space, especially, is that technical SEO is definitely getting oversold. So what I mean by that is, definitely there is a portion of sites which can use technical SEO as a growth lever, and their site is pretty big. They have some JavaScript problems. They have some other rendering problems that they need to solve actively. And we've also seen those cases with some small scale startups, even at our agency, right, where they had very basic sort of indexing problems that needed to be solved before we think about any content creation. But still, that is like 5 to 10% of the market, right? What I see in the market overall is that everyone is starting with a technical SEO audit. They're charging thousands of dollars, and they're doing it for a site with less than 100 pages. It doesn't really make sense to me. The way I think about technical SEO is that it's supposed to be a way to fix the problems that accumulated while you were creating content, right? So for example, you've been creating content for, let's say, a couple of months, years, and then you've accumulated all of these technical roadblocks that now needs to be cleared. So if you are maybe a 50 pages website, you're just getting started, you have a bunch of landing pages, technical SEO wouldn't really move the needle that much for you. But if you have like hundreds and thousands of pages, and you see an entire subfolder or maybe something else that have enormous number of 404 pages, they're blocking a lot of link equity. Maybe you can tweak the site architecture in a way that the internal linking can be just migrated better from one part of the site to another part. All of that stuff will make sense, but most of the small scale startups don't really need technical SEO to as a growth lever. Like, it will not move the needle for them. So the kind of approach that I have, and it goes back to the point that we were talking about, right? One of the components being, what exactly is our growth objective of building an SEO strategy? If you want to drive more customers, a smart SEO strategy will have this logic in it where we're not taking any action until it directly correlates with the objective that we're trying to achieve. So if we want to add more customers, do I
Hmm.
want to spend 6 hours, 12, 10 hours on building a technical SEO audit simply because it's best practices? That wouldn't really be a smart move. So
True.
yeah, so, and of course it then becomes a priority in maybe 12 months, 24 months, once you have been publishing a lot of content and now there are multiple roadblocks that needs to be cleared. But in general, fixing 404 errors and just like fixing some broken links on your site, it might still be some SEO hygiene that you want to maintain, but the news is it wouldn't drive any traffic uplift, and that's just the truth of it. So again, the way I think about this is, what exactly are we trying to achieve, and if we can achieve that while totally ignoring some facets of SEO, then those facets are basically irrelevant in that scenario. So, maybe a different way to think about this would be, imagine you're working with HubSpot, right? And they say, hey, we want to rank for these pieces. That's like their objective. They're not saying, hey, we want to add this much in traffic or maybe this much in pipeline. All they care about is rankings for these specific number of keywords. Now, would you build links for a website like HubSpot? I wouldn't, right? Simply
No.
because they have like this massive authority. So they just
Yeah,
like hit publish and perhaps rank on the first page. Goal accomplished. We don't need to think about link building. So if you say,
correct.
hey, we still need links because it should be a part of a good SEO plan, then again, you're not thinking of the objective. So the way I think about this is, what exactly do we want to achieve, and if we can achieve it while ignoring some specific facets of organic search as a model, then those facets are not relevant within this scenario, within this particular project. And same goes for technical SEO in most of the strategies that I build.
True, true. Yeah, I think the key here is exactly like you said. Yes, maybe few very, very critical fixes, just basic hygiene. Yes, that can help. But apart from that, whatever you see in these tools, like hundreds of warnings, another hundreds of critical issues, it may, exactly like you stated, it would not move the needle. It's not going to bring you any massive growth in traffic or anything of that sort.
Yeah,
So yes, it's about prioritization, and it's about, yeah, identify that key issues which needs to be sorted. But otherwise, I don't think investing a lot of time on technical SEO, exactly like you said, yeah, it's not going to have any impact. It's more
totally.
about the previous point you said, where gathering or talking to customers or prospects, gathering their inputs, their challenges, their solutions, or their what they're looking for, and then creating content for them so that they basically get value out of it. And I think that's the key. That's where the focus should be. And maybe a
Yeah,
10%
exactly.
technical SEO, yeah, that
Yeah,
that would be.
totally, totally. And I again, for anyone listening, I'm not trying to paint a general picture across the
Oh,
board.
yeah,
Of course, there would be some cases
correct.
where it drives a lot of value. I remember before Triple Dot, I was working at another agency, Flying Cat Marketing, and I remember. So I was the head of SEO at that point, and I had one strategist in my team to which we were handing over a project. It was a massive site, hundreds and thousands of pages, driving millions of visitors
Mm,
perhaps every single month, and like really large scale growth program that they were running with SEO. For that
yeah,
project, technical SEO was somewhere close to 80% of our role, right? Like, because they were producing a lot of content in house, they had a pretty strong brand, so we didn't need link building at that point. But what they needed help with was deep level expertise of some technical SEO problems. They had like hundreds and thousands of 404 pages hidden in some subfolders which even Google
oh,
Search Console would not find. So just all of those different kind of problems you still have to navigate in some cases. So again, if someone was to ask me and say, hey, shall we re-optimize these 4 pages for this website, the same website, I would have said the same thing, that hey, it's not going to drive impact. So
yeah,
content in some cases can be non-impactful, and in that case maybe you have growth lever, and growth opportunity in other facets of organic growth. So what I'm saying is, most of the companies, right, that are early stage B2B SaaS simply have almost everything covered. If they're a small site, less than 100 and 200 visitors, 100 and 200 pages, and they have most of the things already covered with a good CMS, right? A good CMS will tell you, hey, put this, make sure these pages are indexed, these pages are not indexed, fix
yeah,
these problems, etc. And you have your basics covered. So at that point, technical SEO is not a priority. It may become a priority in the future.
correct. No, I think, yeah, I mean, if all the points we discussed today, yeah, I think the key is not to generalize. And the key is that do not replicate one strategy exactly as it is across, because yeah, it depends on a lot of factors.
Yep.
And that's why SEO strategy is so important, that aligns to your processes, that aligns to your category, your space, and at what growth stage you are.
100%.
Yeah. Um, I mean, we have basically covered some amazing ground today, from SEO growth strategy to AI. And I know, listeners will find this so valuable. Usman, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. It's been a pleasure having you in the show.
Thank you so much, Anand. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I really appreciate you for inviting me, and I've totally enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you, Usman.